new chapter built on our vision, Jamaica Love. It stands on 10 pillars: justice for all, access to quality education, modern infrastructure, agriculture and food security, innovation and industry, care for the vulnerable, accountability in governance, land and housing, opportunity for youth, violence prevention, and environmental resilience.
Now, a number of those issues, well, all of those issues were addressed during the launch, so let's listen into, let's start with the opposition spokesperson education, Damian Crawford. He spoke about dealing with rural transportation for students.
We had indicated the RIDE program, and the RIDE program is to give $10,000 per month or $2,500 per week as a supplement to individuals who are coming from communities that may, one, not have access to make access more available, but two, may not be able to afford to ensure that they can afford getting to school.
Damian Crawford there. All right, Mr. Tomlinson, let's start with this. I'm trying to understand the PNP's position on rural transportation for kids, because just as background for my listeners, of course, we know that the government has been pushing its new rural bus program. Now, there are concerns about, people have been asking questions about the buses and whether the government has gone about this the right way. Put the buses to one side for a moment. It sounds as if the PNP is doing everything to come up with alternatives to a bus system. As isn't mass transit always more effective, more efficient, safer, more cost effective, especially in this kind of situation?
All right, so I recognize that the discussion surrounding rural transportation has been marred by a degree of misunderstanding as to what the PNP's position is. PNP is not fundamentally against the structured or coordinated bus program to transport our students in the rural areas. With respect to our concerns relating to the rural school bus program being launched by the government, it's not about inherently whether or not a bus program is good, because we are in support of a rural bus program. The challenge that we had that we still have actually with how the government has rolled out this bus program is that we are concerned about the quality of the buses, the appropriateness of the buses, if they are fit for purpose for the type of topography and terrain in the rural areas. We're also looking there at opportunity costs. We spent $1.4 billion to procure 110 buses that are aged, some upwards in the region of 10 years old. So we are looking at the opportunity cost of that, what we could have received in terms of buses if we had taken that resource, that money, that amount of funding, and purchased, let's say, for example, coaster buses that are new, that we could get a warranty on. So we're not against a structured bus program. Our concern has always been about the quality of the buses, the suitability of the buses for the terrain in the rural areas. And I think to some extent we have been vindicated there and by what we have been seeing in the public domain with respect to the incidents of damage happening to the buses through the testing that the government is engaging the buses in.
Remember, I was saying though, put the buses aside, the specific vehicles that this government has bought. Take that out of the equation. That's why I'm trying to understand the principle. Because I'm looking at your manifesto. It says setting up a proper school bus system, but then you also have, in relation to the clip we just heard, this program that will subsidize student travel. Why not just go all out and say, let's set up a proper school bus system island-wide and done?
Excellent question. When we assessed the challenges in the education system, we saw that...
I'm so sorry. Hold on. I need to watch the clock.
No problem.
It is 5:30. Let's take the break. Do a little bit of business. Remember our WhatsApp. 94 FM. I'm Dion Jax-Miller. For today's program, we are looking at some of the plans and proposals put forward by the PNP in their manifesto launched last night. As I mentioned, as soon as the JLP launches its manifesto, we will offer them the same amount of time. Now, we're talking with campaign spokesperson for the PNP, Cleveland Tomlinson. Just before the break, I was asking him about the part in the manifesto where the PNP says they'll be setting up a proper school bus system, but then they also speak about implementing a subsidy program to give students, 20,000 students, primary and secondary, to give them $10,000 a month for student travel. And I was asking you, Mr. Tomlinson, why not just go all out and say, let's deal with the school bus system rather than doing the subsidy program?
Right, because when we sat down and assessed the reasons for the poor education outcomes in our schools, we recognize that absenteeism is a significant problem right there. In deep rural Jamaica, absenteeism is at around a rate of 55%. In rural area, it's roughly 30%. So clearly, absenteeism is a problem. So you now have to ask yourself, what are the reasons behind absenteeism? When we look, we recognize that transportation is a problem. So it's not just about the affordability of transportation, it's also about the accessibility to transport our children to school. So there are some deep rural areas where buses will not be able to traverse those areas. A bus will not be able to navigate the terrain in the rural area. And given that many rural students live in deep rural area, a taxi is most appropriate. And what I want Jamaicans to recognize is that this exists in the status quo. Currently on the path, those students who are on the path program are allotted funding for transportation. What the PNP is doing is expanding that. So having this ride program is not mutually exclusive to having a bus program. Both can coexist. Because, for example, where I come from in deep rural Lloydesville, I have an area called Wandebolas there, and you can't send a bus up there for 6 students. So you need a taxi that will be able to traverse that area, navigate the terrain there, to take the students to the main road, and then they could board the bus. So they're not mutually exclusive, and they can coexist. So in addition to having the bus program operating efficiently, because we will not procure age buses, we will procure appropriate buses for that terrain in the rural area, you will have the taxi, you will have those suitable transportation modalities being prepared to take the students from the deep rural area to the main road. They can board the bus. So they can coexist. And that is the pretext behind why we are supporting and proposing our ride program.
A listener is saying, what would the PNP do with the buses the government has already bought at a cost of over $1 billion, seeing that you have so many issues with them?
Yeah, the reality is that is regrettable. It's regrettable that we're at this point, and we think that had the government not been in a rush to make a political spectacle out of this, we would have been in a position where the country would have procured better buses. But because the government wanted to parade this for a political spectacle for the election, that's why the country is in the position that it is in now. So the money has already been spent. Clearly what we'll do is to keep retrofitting the buses, and for the remainder of their useful life, we'll continue to use the bus. We'll be very vigilant with them to ensure that the safety of students is guaranteed. But Jamaicans can be assured that under PNP administration, we will not procure those kinds of buses because they're not suitable, and the evidence is clear for us to see.
Another listener says, so the PNP is saying they fundamentally agree with the idea of a rural school bus program. Why then not use the $1.9 billion that the ride program will cost to buy the new coaster buses that you have steadfastly said are better?
Except that question, doesn't take into account what I said as a justification for the ride program. Remember what I said is that you have some areas in deep rural Jamaica where a bus is not appropriate. A bus can't traverse that area. A bus can't navigate that terrain. You need a smaller vehicle. You need a taxi. The taximen know the area well, so that is what is most appropriate. So a bus is not, as I said, I use my community for an example. A bus can't navigate the terrain of Wandebolas. A taxi can. So again, you need the taxi to take the students from that part of the community to the main road where they can board the bus. You're not going to send a bus in one lane where the bus can't fit. That's not going to work. So there is a space for coexistence of the ride program and the bus program. It's not either or either. They're not mutually exclusive, and that's what the PNP is saying.
All right, last question on this before I move on. Conway in Montego Bay says, my concern is with the subsidy. How do we know funds will be used as intended?
Well, the PNP government is committed to the principles of of good governance. Well, let me see if I get that question. She's asking, how will we know if the...
How you know that the money you give for transportation expenses will actually be used for that and not, I don't know, for God dance or...
All right, I misinterpreted the question. I thought she wanted to know how will we ensure that the government will spend the money on that program. Well, the PNP is not reinventing the wheel with this initiative. It actually exists in the status quo. I alluded to it earlier by saying within the existence of the PATH program today, students who are on PATH, they are given a transportation subsidy. And we have not received evidence of being abused in the status quo. We don't have reports from the Ministry of Education that says PATH allocations are not being used for the purposes intended. And if that exists, it's certainly not to a considerable degree. So we are not concerned particularly about that happening.
Okay, and Conroy had also asked a question yesterday, not for you, that I hadn't answered. Conroy was saying, what happened with Maurice Guy? I noticed he wasn't on the PNP list of candidates. Did I miss something? I think you may have missed his announcement that he was retiring from representational politics, Conway. All right? Thanks.
Right, and I also want to say, the RIDE program will be executed using the knowledge that the schools have about the challenges that the students face. So we're going to use social workers, we're going to use guidance counselors in schools. We're going to use these individuals who are intimate with respect to knowing about the challenges that the students face so that we can find the students, we know where to locate them, we can send a vehicle for them. So, the students will be able to be located, and that's an important part. So that will help to mitigate the concerns about the abuse of the stipend that will be given.
If you just joined us, we are talking about issues in the PNP's Manifesto launched last night. We're talking with PNP campaign spokesperson Cleveland Tomlinson. We welcome your questions all throughout this program. WhatsApp is 876-254-0693. Now, the PNP announced last night that the manifesto is going to be available in various forms and that there will be a version that's going to be narrated in patois. And they gave a clip of that. Let's listen in. This is with relation to education.
We're going to take out all of this tumbling block them we end up in the Fanga school. The Rural Initiative for Deliver Education, RIDE, I go pay part of the bus fare for primary and high school picnic. We live in an area them where JUTC bus no run. 20,000 picnic, I go get up to $10,000 a month time based on how much them need. Through the program, ensuring adequate sustenance for education is every primary and high school picnic when I go get at least one plate of cooked food for eat a day time.
All right, interesting listening to that next to the clip with Damien. Tell me first, why go this route?
Yeah, because we have always been an inclusive party, and we think that all Jamaicans should be able to access the policy prescriptions that we are proposing. And we are acutely aware that English is not the mother tongue for many Jamaicans. And if you think otherwise, then you are a Jamaican in denial. The reality is that majority of Jamaicans, grew up speaking Creole, using Jamaican patois. And if we want them to be a part of what we are proposing, if we want them to be knowledgeable and to access the information that we are giving, then we have to communicate what we are proposing in their language. So this approach is a part of the inclusive nature of what we're doing and what we will do as a government. And to be honest, and that's what we are proudest of in this manifesto, is that the policy prescriptions are wide-ranging and are inclusive. We didn't design this with just one sector or one group in mind. We built it so that every stakeholder group in the country can see themselves in the manifesto and they can see that their needs and aspirations are being catered to for. And we're very proud of that, and we make no apology for that.
So the particular issue that was mentioned, it started out with RIDE, but then it was speaking about the meal program as well as, and I know the PATH program is
right.
being looked at as well. Tell us quickly what it is you're planning there.
Right, the EASE program, ensuring adequate sustenance for education. Remember,
is there a committee to come up with acronyms?
Actually, if I may be transparent with you, this came out of the preparation for the budget debate. We had consulted with stakeholder groups, we consulted with parents.
And they said they all wanted more acronyms?
No, let me tell you. So we're in the budget debate, and Julian said we need to do something that will assist with easing the cost of living pressure. And we said, okay, we're going to call it EASE. So we need to name it something. We can't just call it EASE. The acronym must mean something. And then I said, ensuring adequate sustenance for education. So that's the origination. So I named the program just given that. So yeah, again, it shows that the PNP is inclusive and young people is at the table, at the decision-making table. And I'm a prime example of that.
One of these days we should line up politicians on both sides and do a pop quiz in terms of all these acronyms they come up with. I bet you half on can't remember them. Right, I bet you. bet you.
No, sir. But you want to know about the pretext for the East program. So again, remember, we are interested in improving education outcomes. And we recognize that absenteeism, again, is a core reason why our students are not performing well. Because when a student is only able to attend school for 3 out of 5 days in a week, that student has missed a significant percentage of the content being taught in the classroom. So if you want the child to be able to perform better, to have better passes, and to be able to be literate and numerate by a certain level, at a certain grade, then that student must be consistently attending school. One of the major challenges that informs absenteeism is the fact that parents can't afford the lunch money. So what we want to do is to say, if you can't afford the lunch money, send the child to school. The child will receive 1 hot meal per day.
Hold that thought for me. Let me just go to the break. We'll come back in a moment. You're listening to Beyond the Headlines. We're talking about the PNP Manifesto. Back in a moment.
Every time you are link with a condom, coulda Ozzy, coulda wife, coulda be a random. Do it for your best life.
The time by the Ministry of Health and Wellness is 5:46.
So much for staying with us. We continue with you on Beyond the Headlines. I'm Dion Jacks Miller. We're talking about the PNP's manifesto, and quite a few of you have questions coming in. I do want to get to those. Keep them coming. 876-254-0693. 876-254-0693. Give us your first name. Give us your general location. We're talking with Cleveland Tomlinson, PNP campaign spokesperson. Had you finished a point? I know I'd interrupted you.
Yeah, finish the Ease program.
All right, so let me go to a couple of questions from listeners before I continue. Gary in Havendale is asking, he says, please explain the hair discrimination ban.
Right. So the social consciousness of the society has been shaken more than once with this hair discrimination issue. We've seen cases being brought to the courts and the court ruling in favor of a particular party. But quite frankly, we are a culturally aware party. I would think that no child should be discriminated. No Jamaican at all should be discriminated against because of the hairstyle that he or she decides to wear. Just as how we do not condone any kind of discrimination, we think discrimination has no place in a modern democratic society. So what we will do is that, if you recognize what the government has done, I think the last press release from the government on this issue, the Ministry of Education essentially shift the responsibility to the schools to determine what their hair policy will be. That will not be the approach under People's National Party government. It will be a policy from central government. It will be a policy from the Ministry of Education that no child should be sent back, should be sent out of school. No child should be discriminated against based on the hairstyle that he or she wears. Simply that.
Okay, tell me why the decision to go the route of policy rather than put in place actual legislation. We've seen legislation in other jurisdictions. For instance, several states in the United States have what they call a Crown Act, which specifically prevents discrimination, or prohibits, I should say, discrimination against black hair, for instance. So why policy and not law?
We're not averse to policy, to be honest. We will start at the policy level. If we recognize that there are inadequacies, if we recognize that insufficiencies exist after, and then we are prepared to go the route of legislation. So to be honest, that's not something we're averse to, because we want to put an end to this. And if legislation is what is necessary to get the job done, you can be rest assured that the PNP will do that.
Okay, Faye is asking, what are the new plans for pensioners?
Oh yes, good question, Faye, and thank you for listening. We recognize, Faye, that inflation has eroded the purchasing power of all Jamaicans, and for many pensioners, the pension income is their sole source of income. So when you look at the amount of money that a pensioner receives weekly, some pensioners receive $3,400 weekly. When you take into account the reduction in purchasing power from inflation, then you recognize that that individual is unable to meet the standard of living necessary at that age. So what we intend to do is we're going to look carefully at increasing the tax exemptions on pension income. So there are some tax exemptions that exist now, and we have stated it in the manifesto. A PNP-led administration will look at increasing the tax exemptions that exist. So what that will afford an individual is that there will be a greater tax-free threshold, which essentially means that pensioners will be able to take home more of their pension, and will not, a significant portion of it will not be subjected to income tax, and that's important.
All right, I'm listening to your language, and you say a PNP government would look carefully at the tax exemptions. Your manifesto actually is more decisive, though. It says remove tax from pension income. Well,
with respect to that, we had put out a revised version of the manifesto this morning, so you can find an updated version on our website. So we have adjusted that language, and the new adjustment is that we will increase the tax exemption on pension. So that language from which you're reading from is redundant, because we have made some alterations to that.
Okay, since I got that today. Right.
And we apologize for that.
Yeah. Okay, but why though? Why the change? Because this sounds, I can imagine Faye and others would have much preferred the more definitive language of removing tax. So the kind of sound like on a gone wishy-washy now.
No, I wouldn't say that, because remember, a government has to be fiscally prudent, and we have to be able to balance the books and balance people's lives, and we have to give concerns to both sides of the coin. So while we want to be able to provide a degree of relief for our pensioners, we also have to look as well on how well we manage the books, the fiscal cost of it, and how that will be accounted for in the budget. So we think that adjusting the tax exemptions will be able to afford pensioners a decent amount. Notice as well, it has been increased in the past, and the PNP-led administration is prepared to go further, because inflation continues to erode the purchasing power. So that's the pretext behind the adjustment. It's about balancing people's lives, and that's crucial going forward.
And I suspect Faye would also have wanted to hear, apart from taxes, hear some kind of promise to actually increase pensions.
Yeah, so our focus will be on growing the economy, because it is through growth in the economy that we'll be able to generate the tax revenues to respond to the social needs that exist, to strengthen the respective social safety nets. And pension is a part of that social safety net. So when we're able to grow the economy, and that will be the foremost let's say the foremost initiative of the PNP. On day one, our agenda will be to grow the economy. And we're not going to accept 1% growth. If you look at the fiscal policy paper, the government has projected that through 28, from this fiscal year through to fiscal year 28-29, they're anticipating that the economy will grow by 1%. That is woefully inadequate, cannot generate the adequacy in revenues needed. So when there's growth in the economy, the PNP is interested at looking at how we can strengthen social safety nets, and pension is also a part of what we regard to be a social safety net.
Sorry, Faye, no joy for you yet. But since you mentioned the words fiscally prudent, I was going to ask this a little later, but let me throw this in here, because listeners are going to be listening to all of this and saying, okay, there's which I've been saying for a couple of months. You guys haven't given us a costing or even rough estimates for a lot of what you're proposing. So how do we know you'll even be able to do it?
No, we have actually. Recall a few days after the opposition leader presented his budget presentation, we had a press conference where we outlined the costing for our programs, and I can give you the costing. So for the EASE program that we spoke of early, ensuring adequate sustenance through education, that's roughly around $9.7 billion, and if it's comfortable within the budget. I'll explain the funding sources. I've given you the costing now since you brought that up. The EASE program will cost roughly $9.7 billion. The RIDE program will cost roughly $1.9 billion. And there are other initiatives that we can talk about later. The First in Family Scholarship, which will cost roughly $3.9 billion. The Agricultural Development Fund, we estimate that to be $2.5 billion. The income tax waiver for small businesses at $1 billion. The Emerging Industries Fund, $1 billion. The reversal of the asset tax over 5 years, $2 billion over 5 years. Right, and we have our way. We'll have our way of funding these proposals. So let me explain how we'll fund them. Within the budget, we have what's called a discretionary element. So if you look at how the budget is structured, you have recurrent revenue, so you have tax revenue and non-tax revenue under that. You have loans, grants, capital revenue that would come from a capital development fund. And those areas, those components make up what the total budget is. But within the recurrent expenditure, within the budget, there is an element that's called the discretionary expenditure, which is what the priorities of any administration is. So those priorities will be prioritized by any administration, to be honest. So they will fit their expenditure profile or craft their expenditure profile to reflect their priorities. And the discretionary component of the budget is roughly $360 billion. So when we look at the full cost of our initiatives, we are looking at roughly $23 billion. If you want to be a bit more liberal with that, at most $25 billion. That fits comfortable within the discretionary envelope of the budget, which is $360 billion. But in addition to that, we are anticipating that there will be annual organic increase in revenue, and that is also accounted for in the fiscal policy paper. So the government...
Hold that thought for me. We're going to pick up when we come back. We are talking on Beyond the Headlines. I'm Dion Jax Miller, continuing today's special program, spending the entire program looking at issues coming out of the PNP's manifesto and putting as many of your questions as I can to the PNP rep we have in studio, Cleveland Tomlinson. Now, just before I go back to a couple clips as well as some more of your questions, before the break, I'd asked Mr. Tomlinson about, how they're going to pay for it.
Right.
And you're quite right, my apologies, that because it was after the finance minister in her closing presentation said that what Mr. Golding had presented, what the PNP had presented was an implied budget. You then had a press conference and put some figures to the various proposals. So I not generally seeing those throughout here though, but you were speaking about how it is the PNP plans to fund its program. So I'm going to let you go.
Right, I'd started with readjustment of a discretionary expenditure, and that component in the budget is roughly $360 billion. And when we do our costing, we realize that our programs come up to roughly 6% of that $360 billion. So you can make the deduction that it can be comfortably accommodated just within the discretionary profile of the budget. But outside of that, if you look at the fiscal policy paper, it projects that there will be growth in government revenue over the next 3 fiscal years to the tune of $140 billion. So our programs that will be phased will be able to be accommodated and can be financed just by the organic growth in revenues, because the economy is projected to grow, albeit by a dismal percentage, 1%. That's problematic. We don't want that. So our focus will be on growing the economy. We will grow the economy, and I think our opposition leader was on your program in some months ago, and he said that we're targeting 3% growth. That's where we want to go, 3%. So that will be able to generate more revenues. But in addition to the annual organic growth in revenues and the readjustment of the discretionary expenditure, we are going to look at wastage in government, and we're going to stop the wastage, and we're going to save money. I'll give you one area of wastage: the Ministry of Legal and Constitutional Affairs. We're going to shut down that ministry, and we're going to repatriate the functions that exist in that ministry to the Ministry of Justice. And anyone who is a keen observer of the politics knows why that ministry was created. One can say, it was untenable for Marlene Malawufo to have remained in the Attorney General's chamber. She racked up several legal losses for the government. I could understand why the Prime Minister would want to take her out of the Attorney General's chamber. Who could wrong him?
So is this a personal thing or a policy thing?
No.
It sounding personal. No, it sounds like I have it in for the minister.
No. I was just saying that we should be very clear about when we are structuring government and when we are using taxpayers' money. We should ensure that it is properly guided and be informed. And we think that the functions being executed now by the Ministry of Legal and Constitutional Affairs can be executed by the Ministry of Justice. So we're going to repatriate those functions to the Ministry of Justice. We'll be able to save money from that. So if you look right now, since the existence of the ministry, they have been allocated a budget of roughly $4.4 billion since they have been established, I believe, in 2022. Let's say a component of what they have been allocated for is to execute the constitutional reform process. So even if we say we shut down that ministry, repatriate the functions to the Ministry of Justice, we save on administration expenses, operating expenses, roughly 80%. So again, we're going to look at how government is structured to reduce wastage. That's a key point, and I was just giving you an example of an area that we consider to be a wastage, which is the establishment of a Ministry of Legal and Constitutional Affairs to duplicate functions that the Ministry of Justice could do.
All right, so let me share a couple of comments from listeners. Shireen in St. Thomas says, as a soft skills and communication coach, I just want to say it's refreshing to listen to your guest, Mr. Tomlinson, and his civil and personable tone with emphasis on two key tenets of effective communication: keep it simple, silly, and a drop of honey instead of vinegar. The details shared of the manifesto are digestible as well. And Shireen,
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Shireen. All right, so Paulette Retreat says, hopefully the PNP 10 pillars don't become the pillars of salt. And Lennox Bigwood says, please ask your guests if a PNP government would put in place laws preventing MPs, councillors and their families from doing business with the government.
So we have very strong core principles that we think government should be operated on. Those are transparency and accountability. And there are mechanisms that exist in the status quo where individuals will declare interest. So we want to ensure that the structures that exist to guard against corruption are strengthened. So we will look at all the avenues that can be improved to ensure that we rid ourselves of corruption, we suppress it as much as possible, and that no one uses public office to benefit himself or his family. So we are about good governance, accountability, transparency. Public funds is for the public's use, and you should not use your office to enrich yourself or your family member. And that's the principle of the People's National Party.
Is that a yes or no to the question? Or?
Yeah, we are prepared to look at whether that can be accommodated, and if yes, certainly.
Martin in Angel says the long-term sustainability of all the initiatives outlined are dependent on a robust economy. Please comment on plans and strategies to grow the economy beyond the current rate, at least over the next 5 years, including, if possible, a timetable.
Beautiful plan, beautiful question. Now, let me tell you about how we grow the economy. We'll talk about a timetable after. Growth is important, and we have some structural challenges, and I want to contextualize the economy for you because I hear the government talking about their big, beautiful economy. There's a difference, Dion, between macroeconomic stability and the real economy. What Jamaica has been able to achieve over the last decade is stability in the macroeconomy, meaning indicators are looking good. So the debt to GDP ratio has declined, and there's a point I will make later about debt to GDP because I recognize the government is spreading a false narrative, but I'll ask you for a moment to talk about debt to GDP later. So the macro numbers, the macroeconomic indicators, we have healthy reserves. According to the central bank, inflation is within the target range now. So stability has been achieved, and that's not solely due to the efforts of the Holness administration. In fact, largely it is because of the People's National Party, the structural reforms that we implemented in our last administration. The independence of the central bank that Nigeria
built on by the JLP administration.
Right, yeah,
surely.
They continued, certainly. I wrote an article actually in the paper the other day saying assessing Jamaica's JLP's economic record, and I credited them. I credited the Holness administration for continuing with the macro fiscal policy framework that that was strengthened by the People's National Party. So, you know, you have to be balanced and fair. They're continuation of what we started, and we did the heavy lifting, because you would recall, Dion, that the economy was in tatters, on the precipice of a collapse when we took office in 2012. We renegotiated the IMF agreement. Recall, the IMF packed up and left Jamaica because of how the Golden administration dealt with the IMF. They defaulted on the standby arrangement at the time, you know, and we were shut out of the international capital markets. Portia Simpson and I had to use our political capital to get to our friends in the US Congress to lobby the International Monetary Fund for us to even get a meeting. So we negotiated, tortuously so, the IMF agreement at the time. We implemented the fiscal reforms. You know who was there to implement the fiscal reforms? Mark Jefferson Golden. He was Justice Minister. He had to pilot those legislations. In fact, he chaired the Legislation Committee of Parliament. So Mark was instrumental in the economic recovery. We strengthened the fiscal rules. You hear the government boasts today about low debt to GDP. What they will not tell you is that in 2014, it was the People's National Party that enshrined into law. It was the People's National Party that enshrined into law the legal requirement that any government coming to office will have to abide by the fiscal rules and will have to ensure that debt to GDP is reduced by a certain timeline. So not only did we strengthen the fiscal rules, we put in a legal time frame by which it should be achieved. In fact, we had originally set 25-26 fiscal year for the debt to be reduced to 60% of GDP. COVID came, the parliament approved an extension of the time frame, and it was extended to 27-28 fiscal year. So again, what we're seeing today in terms of the low debt to GDP is largely because of the framework by the PNP.
But having said that, now talk to us about growth and moving forward.
Right, beautiful. So the economy continues to be stagnant largely because we're uncompetitive. And one of the areas of our uncompetitiveness is the cost of energy. The cost of energy is too high for you to be a competitive economy. No foreign direct investment will flow when your economy is uncompetitive, when you have high energy costs. If you look, there was a report done that indicated that foreign direct investment a decade ago in Jamaica was 6% of GDP. At the end of 2024, it was 1% of GDP. A significant contraction in foreign direct investment because the cost of energy is so high. When the PNP took office in 2012, the cost per each kilowatt hour was roughly 32 US cents. When we left office, we were able to significantly reduce that to roughly 23 kilowatt hour.
Move us forward.
Right. What we're going to do, in addition to renegotiating the IMF agreement, we are going to expedite on a wide scale the addition of renewable energies to the national grid. The last two times we saw a massive addition to the renewable energy is largely an outcome of the processes started by the People's National Party. When we came to office last in government, we negotiated, we issued a request for proposal that would see significant megawatts of renewable energy being added to the national grid. That RFP resulted in the build out of the plant in Content Clarendon, the renewable energy plant in Content Clarendon. The one in Paradise Park, Westmoreland that was built out, it happened under the GLP, but we were the ones who issued the RFP in 2015. So it was a creature of our creation in essence. We did that. So again, the government has failed to add renewable energy on a wide scale to the national grid. It took 8 years, Dion, 8 years for them to issue a RFP because of the corruption at the energy ministry started by Andrew Wheatley. Have to get that out.
Tell me though, because we talk a lot about renewable energy, but and we know it's cleaner, we know it's better for the environment, we know we need it in terms of the climate change issues. But I keep hearing the concern about renewable energy and its intermittency, the fact that it's intermittent and that we cannot predicate our grid on renewable energy, no matter how far we've come. So are you over-promising and overestimating the benefits to be gained from expansion?
Actually not. For our own energy security, we have to diversify the national grid. So there will always be a place for fossil fuel. The challenge is that there is an over-reliance on fossil fuel, we're referring to oil, is that roughly 80% of energy generated in Jamaica today comes from fossil fuel, which means we are exposed to the volatility, the global volatility in oil prices. So if something happens in Iraq next week, if something happens in Israel, if something happens in Iran, then global oil prices will spike. And we are, in essence, vulnerable to that exogenous or what we call external shock. So for our own economic stability and energy security, we have to reduce our reliance on fossil fuel. So what we want to do is to diversify electricity generation in Jamaica, and there's actually, Dion, a policy of the government to ensure that by 2030, 50% of energy generated in Jamaica is from renewables. We are nowhere near making that target. So again, we really need to expedite it. This is not a policy of the PNP alone. There's a government policy today that exists, that the Holness administration touts, that says by 2030, at least 50% of our energy generation should be coming from renewable energy. Now, so the problem is that we are over-reliant on fossil fuels now, and we need to diversify the national grid. And we're going to be doing that as well. And we have a track record. We have a history. In the last PNP administration, we revised the Electricity Act. We established what we call the Generation Procurement Entity, which is GPE, which allows the government to be able to establish RFPs and to procure energy and to revolutionize the energy sector. So we have a track record, and we are prepared to go further with that.
All right. Housing, I know, is a concern for a lot of people. Let's listen to what opposition spokesperson on land, Lothan Cousins, had to say about the PNP plan.
We will reduce the number of years for those who are living on squatter land from 60 to 25 years. That is for those living on crown lands. We are going to immediately end the extraction of the $11 billion every single year from the National Housing Trust. All of you in Jamaica and across the world would have heard about our Rent to Own initiative. It is a bold, forward-thinking initiative that will allow thousands of Jamaicans who cannot afford a home to start out by renting that home. And after 6 months, after you have demonstrated that you're able to cover the rental expenses, that will be converted to a mortgage, and you will now be paying a mortgage monthly and be owning that piece of land that you're on.
All right, so tell us how the idea is, how would this work?
Right, and before I get into that, I was using some acronyms earlier when I was talking about energy, and I said RFP, but for full clarity and accessibility, when I say RFP, I mean a request for proposal, where the government essentially issues, and investors who are interested in setting up that plant will be able to accept that request, submit rather their proposal, the government examines it, etc., and the process continues from there. So it's a request for proposal. Right, so to the question of housing, yeah, the Rent to Own program is something we're very proud of. We're very proud to propose it, and we're going to ensure that it happens. And you have to look at the kind of economy that you have, Dion. The jobs that are existing today are jobs that don't offer income security. The income that you earn is not sustainable, and they come in a sort of choppy way. So you have persons who are interested in owning a home, but they may not be able to demonstrate to a lender that they have the sustainability of income to get a mortgage. So if you're going to the bank to get a mortgage, the bank is going to ask you for at least 3, some ask you for 5, 6 payslip. But the kinds of jobs that are predominant in Jamaica, even though we have a low unemployment rate, are low skilled, low wage jobs, and like a contract job, a little 1 hour, 5 hour job, you don't have the income. So what we're saying is that someone will be able to, someone who cannot produce a payslip to prove their income so as to qualify for a mortgage, we're going to allow them to go into possession of the house as a tenant and access mortgages after 6 months of honoring their rental payment so as to become owners. So if they can establish to us that they can meet the rental payment over 6 months, then we will take that as evidence that you are able to satisfy the mortgage or the debt obligation each month, and we are going to transfer you're going to move your status from being a tenant to an owner after 6 months. So in essence, what you're doing is that you're demonstrating to us that your income is sustainable, that you can meet mortgage payment, which is revolutionary because your policy has to respond to the kind of economy you have. You have to contextualize it.
Hold that thought for me. Let me go to break. We'll soon come. Thank you so much for staying with us. We continue with you on Beyond the Headlines. I'm Dion Jacks Miller. Just before I continue, we've been talking to Cleveland Tomlinson of the PNP about the party's manifesto launched last night and some of the issues, and lots of your questions coming in. I'm running out of time, but I'll try and take a couple more of them. But first, let me just apologize for a comment Mr. Tomlinson made a little while ago. He was speaking about the former Energy Minister, Dr. Wheatley, and spoke of him and corruption. There was never any finding of that. Yes, there was an Integrity Commission report. The matter went to the Supreme Court, and I'm not going to go into everything that happened, but just to say that Dr. Wheatley was never charged with any corruption-related offences. He was not found to be corrupt in the investigation. So I apologize for that and distance ourselves from that. All right, let me share a couple more of your comments coming in. Stumping us sauces. This young man knows his stuff. He makes it so easy for us to understand. Damien in Kingston says, please ask Mr. Tomlinson if the low-income earners' rent will be the same as the mortgage after the period of rental turns to home ownership, and what happens if the low-income earner is unable to meet all 6 months of the rental agreement.
Right, so yes to the first part of the question. Yes, the mortgage will be equivalent to the rent. So we will structure the rent so that it can be equivalent to what the mortgage is, because remember, what we're trying to find out is if you are in a position where you can meet the mortgage payment on a monthly basis. So if you can demonstrate to us that you can meet the rental payment, which will be equivalent to the mortgage payment, then that for us will satisfy what we need to know, and we will be able to give you ownership. With respect to not being able to meet the rental payment over 6 months, we will have to look very closely at that. Clearly, you can't broad brush everybody. You have to look at the idiosyncrasies. There might be some reasons behind why there was a missing payment, etc. So again, we will look very closely at that because there are idiosyncrasies that affect people's capacity. So we'll look at that carefully.
Let's take a clip on health. Opposition spokesperson on health, Dr. Alfred Dawes, said the PNP would fix problems in the public health system.
So I invite you, Jamaica, to journey with the PNP as we reduce waiting times for surgeries in A&E departments, in clinics, where we move patients out of chairs into beds, where we save mothers from dying in labor with improved antenatal care rather than blaming the mothers. We will end the lies that a dead baby a day at the Victoria Jubilee Hospital is due to prematurity by building a proper neonatal ICU at the Bustamante Hospital for Children, for ensuring that timely surgeries and interventions are done at Bustamante, the largest pediatric hospital in the English-speaking Caribbean, by having a proper CT scan and MRI for the first time, instead of having those children and babies carted over in the cold air to KPH. It is a pledge, it is a promise, it will be done.
I guess listening, because I listened to Dr. Dawes' presentation, and as well I was looking at the issues in the manifesto, and I guess one of the questions there is always going to be what is realistic when? So for instance, just to read Just to read a couple of the points in the manifesto. Here, create centers of excellence for day surgeries to reduce waiting times and backlogs. Establish 24-hour urgent care centers to ease pressure on emergency room in hospital. Invest in AI-driven health system to improve diagnosis and telemedicine. Ensure every parish hospital has radiology and CT scan capability. Expand radiology department at Bustamante Children's. Strengthen mental health services by training more professionals. Build at least one mobile emergency response team per parish. Increase the number of blood collection centers, and it goes on. It sounds like a Christmas wish list.
No, they're credible proposals, because what we are presenting are our ideas for a full term in government, and clearly, what we are proposing, not everything could be done within one fiscal year. In fact, remember that the election is September, so we are coming in when roughly half the fiscal year will have passed, and we are confined by the budget that was structured, designed by the Homeless Administration. Remember, the Appropriations Act, every expenditure that comes out of government, etc., has to be executed within that big yellow book, within the envelope, within the confines of that big yellow book. So as a government coming in, we will be largely operating with the budget that was structured by the Homeless Administration. Yeah, we can make some changes through supplementary estimates, not significant, and again, it definitely would not be ideal. So we will pursue initiatives that can be done through policy, through legislation as well. With respect to some other long term, we will start immediately on that when we have the fiscal space with respect to when we design our budget. And when we win the election in September, we'll be coming into office. We'll be able to design our budget in about 4 or 5 months from that, because we will win the election on the 3rd of September. And the fiscal year ends March 31, roughly 6 months there. So, and the new budget will be presented in March. So again, we'll be able to do that. But there are some things that we've already started on. If you look in the manifesto, you'll see where it says reform urgent emergency services with an adopt an ambulance program supported by the private sector and civic groups. We have started our discussions already. The other day, the opposition leader made an announcement that he has been meeting with investors. Yes, we have been preparing to come to government, because we intend and we will come to government. So we have been working on things like these. We already have private sector groups and investors who have committed to supporting us in this regard, and this is one of the programs that we're presented. So things will roll out as we go along.
Dan in Kingston says, I love the idea of cutting waste. The rental of the space on Old Hope Road for the Ministry of Legal and Constitutional Affairs is major waste. Joe in St. Elizabeth says, quick suggestion, maybe the next party could look into reducing tax on overtime, at least for those working 20 extra hours a month in the private sector. Right now, tax on overtime makes it feel like the extra effort isn't worth it, and only the organizations in private sector are benefiting. Easing that tax a bit could give people more spending power and motivation to do extra work.
Yeah, that's actually in the manifesto. Yeah, so it's in the manifesto that the PNP will look at we will remove taxes on overtime. We've done the costing, etc. That's something that will be done on a phased basis. So yes, what's the name of that person who sent in the message?
Somebody in St. Elizabeth. Joe,
yes, Joe. It is a commitment of the People's National Party to remove taxes on overtime. Yeah.
Jamal in St. Catherine says, I think the initiative to include the pathway in the manifesto is unique, very inclusive. My question, though, is the first in every family going to school define family?
Right. An important question, because we know we have different types of families, and I anticipated this question. Right. So what we're essentially saying is that the family will be defined as those within living under a single household or family by shared ancestry. Those are the two avenues. So if you're the first child in the family under the household, then you will qualify for that. If you're the first child within shared ancestry, for example, let's say we share a mother, but we don't share a father, right? And we're not living in the same roof. So we look at shared ancestry as a classification of family. So those are broadly the two avenues.
And just for clarity, I heard Damian Crawford say last night, because that relates to the proposal about going to first in family to go to university,
Right.
getting the degree paid for. But I heard him say last night it will also apply to technical or trade training.
Right, yeah. So recall as well, given the type of economy that we want to build, we want to improve the industrial base of the economy. We want to equip our workers with technical capacities. We're not just looking at tertiary education, we're looking at vocational certification up to level 4 and so on. So yes, Mr. Crawford accurately characterized that.
Okay.
And it also applies if you're in school already. So this first in the family scholarship applies if you're in school already. Yeah.
Listener says, will PNP use NHT contributors' money to run the government and then say no new taxes? In fact, they have announced that you're going to immediately stop the withdrawal. So how does that affect the funding?
Well, right. We announced from back in March that we will stop the annual extraction of $11.4 billion from the National Housing Trust. And I know the Labour Rights will try to be cheeky and they will want to say, oh, the PNP started it. Yes, we were the ones who initially started the extraction, but there's a context to it. There's a reason. Why did we have to do it? Because the Jamaica Labour Party defaulted on the standby agreement under Bruce Colin, Aldishaw's finance minister, left the economy in tatters. Debt was spiraling in the wrong direction, and we had to generate sufficient revenues to meet the primary surplus, the fiscal targets under the new IMF program that the PNP tortuously negotiated. So we needed we needed revenues. So the PNP, in essence, determined at the time that we would start the extraction. It was never meant to continue in perpetuity, and if you recall, the JLP carried us to court at that time to say, and the court sided with the government at the time. So you would have thought that when the JLP came to office in 2016, they would have stopped it, given that they carried us to court to stop it. But they continued it, and they have continued it up to 2024, and we're going to stop it.
My apologies, I have to stop you now because we're entirely out of time. We're into sports. We've been talking to Cleveland Tomlinson from the PNP. He's talking to us about the PNP's manifesto launched last night. And just to set my listeners, he's also going to be my guest along with Senator Donna Scott Motley on All Angles.